welcome back to day 2 of the 2025 Keystone News Summit. I hope everyone enjoyed their evening and took some time with our incredible speakers and panelists. And for those of you just joining us, I'm Natalie Bensavanga, and I'm happy to be here today. I'm an independent journalist, media strategist, and a professional fellow at the Duquesne University Patricia Doherty Yoder Institute for Ethics and Integrity in Journalism and Media. And as a reminder, we're being joined by our friends at the Pennsylvania Cable Network, who are live streaming this event in its entirety, hence all of the cameras in the room. So thank you, PCN, for covering this event. And we have a very full morning of programming, so we're going to follow a very tight schedule. Just like yesterday, I'm going to be timing each session to ensure that we stay on schedule. I'll be announcing when it is time to transition to the Q&As or for the next segment. We're going to engage in some thought-provoking conversations today that relate to government and legislative initiatives impacting the news business. We've blocked off ample time at the end of each session for questions from the audience, so please hold them until the Q&A. And also, don't forget about our asks and offers board by the registration table. Have you left a note yet? And this is a space to share needs and resources, so please take advantage and check that out before you leave. In fact, we had some out there. One said, hey, I'm looking for interns. Another one said, hey, I have internships available. You guys should meet. That would be good. So make sure you're checking out the board and connect with people who might be able to fill a need and vice versa. And also, if you're staying at the hotel, make sure you know that checkout is at 11 a.m. So if you need to store your luggage during one of the breaks, please do so then. Even though today is our final day of the 2025 Keystone News Summit, we don't want this conversation to end. We'd love to stay in touch with all of you. So if you'd like to share your information for our Keystone News Summit digital directory, please scan the QR code on the back of your program to fill out a brief connection form. The information you provide will be made available to the fellow conference attendees so that you can connect with each other after the event. And I think also inside your program, there are places where you can follow people on social media as well, just like me up here. So please do that. I'd love to connect with all of you. So without further ado, we're going to be turning our attention to Solution 4, which is government and legislative programs and initiatives, in which we discuss the role of public funding and policy in revitalizing local news ecosystems. Please help me welcome our first keynote speaker, Matt Pierce, Director of Policy for Rebuild Local News. For several years, Matt was president and co-founder of the Media Guild of the West, one of the fastest growing unions of the News Guild, CWA, representing journalists in Southern California, Arizona, and Texas. He previously served as chair of the Executive Director Search Committee for the Society of Professional Journalists. Matt got his start in journalism as a reporter for the Los Angeles Times, where he covered national news, politics, and internet culture. Welcome, Matt.
Good morning. All right, pause. Take a big sip of coffee with me. Let's try that one more time. Good morning. It's good to be here with all of you. You may notice from your programs that I am not Steve Waldman, the founder of Rebuild Local News. He sadly could not be here today. He's also tall. He has more hair than me. But he's very important in the world of journalism public policy, what I'm here to talk to you all today, because this is a subject that I'm really excited about. I'm the new director of policy for Rebuild Local News. We're growing. We try to create public policies across the 50 states to support local news and community information. So, raise your hand if you are worried about the state of local news in your community. Okay, you can raise both hands if you're really worried. You don't have to. I would raise both. All right. Who thinks it's hopeless and we can't do anything about it? Raise your hand. All right, you're my people. Rebuild Local News, we are the premier national coalition working on developing new public policies to support and sustain local news in our communities. We bring together print and digital publishers, broadcasters, public media, professional journalist associations, labor unions, academics, business people, philanthropists, foundations, local civic leaders who are really interested in doing something to support journalism across the 50 states, because this is actually quite an exciting time to start thinking about what public policy can do for journalism. And it's an interesting story. At the federal level, we're playing a lot of defense right now to try to protect the existing public policies that support journalism, funding for the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, NPR, PBS, vital sources of news in our communities still, working with local public broadcasters. But at the state level, there's actually a ton of activity that we're going on offense. There's a lot to do, actually, because state lawmakers have grown increasingly cognizant that we have a problem and that something needs to be done about it. And actually, I'll talk a little bit about why I care so much about this subject. I was a reporter at the Los Angeles Times for a long time. The Los Angeles Times is currently collapsing. I could write a Russian novel about all the reasons why that's happening and everything that went wrong. And a lot of those problems are specific to the LA Times. Some of those problems are not. And the thing that really changed me in my perspective on this entire subject was when I became the president of my News Guild local and started working with journalists at other types of newsrooms, all sorts of other types of newsrooms across the region. Journalists at, local alt weeklies, events-based journalists at Pop-Up Magazine, magazine writers at California Sunday, journalists who worked for hedge fund-owned papers. We were owned by a billionaire. We started working with a lot of journalists working in nonprofit newsrooms, large and small. And one thing that they all had in common is that they were all scared for the future. They were scared that what they were doing was not economically viable. And that was reflected in so many experiences that I saw, my own fellow Guild members go through when California Sunday and Pop-Up Magazine, with its own unique, innovative model, shut down. Houston Landing was organized with my local. It was an American Journalism Project launch. That has just announced that it's shutting its doors in June. We were certainly organizing and running strikes against Alden Global Capital, sort of a famous destroyer of newspapers, but what really scared me was that I was seeing decline in other types of newsrooms as well. And even outside of my newsroom in Southern California, we watched journalists at the public broadcasters getting laid off too, because public media was also struggling. So it was clear that there's systemic issues, and I wanted to do something about it, and that's why I'm with Rebuild Local News, and that's why I'm here. So, why public policy? I want to show you this chart that I have been obsessing over lately, and I'll explain what it is. It's very simple. So this chart, this comes from the U.S. Bureau of Economic Analysis, the National Income and Product Account. This is the economic activity that's happening inside the United States. This is actually data that's very important for figuring out what's going on with national trade and tariffs, the potential impact of tariffs. Personal consumer spending on newspapers and periodicals was sinking like a rock after 2007. We all saw this, we all felt this, we all were worried about it. Since 2015, it's been climbing again. The consumer, the general, average, generic consumer, is now spending as much of their household budget on newspapers and periodicals as they were in 2007. Again, the consumer out there is spending as much of their household budget on newspapers and periodicals as they were in 2007. Now, what's the problem with that? Not inflation, actually, because this is a portion of the overall budget. The economy's gotten bigger since 2007. So actually, consumers are now spending more dollars on journalism than they were in 2007, technically. Well, some fuzziness in the numbers here, newspapers and periodicals. The problem is that your dollar is not paying for as much journalism as you were getting in 2007. Every dollar you spend on journalism is getting less journalism than you were purchasing in 2007. A lot of reasons for that. Collapse of the advertising is the biggest one, but you can kind of look around and see that our industry's gotten a lot smarter about connecting with our communities, developing relationships with readers, figuring out how to get them to pay for journalism. You see this in dynamic pricing models. You see this in tiered subscriptions. You see this in new models like Substacks for independent creators, which are getting really sophisticated about figuring out how to prompt people, individual people, to give small dollars to support journalism. Nonprofits have gotten really smart about appealing for money and funding, going after small contributions. In all sorts of ways, we've gotten better at building those relationships, bringing up that kind of revenue. Even if it's not necessarily going to your newsroom, it's going somewhere. But we're obviously missing something. And one of the things that we're missing is public policy. The United States trails the world's advanced democracies in how few public dollars we spend on supporting journalism and community information. Most other advanced democracies around the world, this is a massively important public expenditure. Usually you see that in the form of like a BBC in the United Kingdom or a CBC in Canada and lots of other public subsidies that Canada does to support journalism. In the United States, you look at the chart, we're near rock bottom at public spending to support journalism. So, Rebuild Local News, we make the case that there are all sorts of policy interventions that are going to be necessary to support the innovation and the creativity and the community building that you all are doing, but it does need some public support. So we're seeing a lot of activity here. New York created a $90 million journalist employment tax credit. So, to just kind of like moneyball out for a second. All right, what do we want? More local journalism. How do you get more local journalism? Get more journalists. How do you get more journalists? Make it more affordable to employ, hire, retain journalists. And that's what the journalist employment tax credit programs do. They allow publishers and other news employers to credit a portion of a journalist's wages against their tax bill and make it more affordable to hire the kids that are coming out of the J schools right now and employ them instead of just paying them less money or not employing them at all, which is what normally happens. Illinois, you're going to hear from Senator Steve Stottlemyre a little bit later. I've heard he had a sort of flight cancellation, so he's going to be a little bit later in the morning. He's been a great champion. He shepherded through a package in Illinois that included a $25 million journalist employment tax credit, along with some other programming. Similar concept, make it more affordable to employ journalists. Many other states this year introduced similar policies. We haven't passed any of them this year yet. This is following after California a few years ago allotted $25 million for a fellowship program run through UC Berkeley, where early career journalists are hired by the University of California system and then placed in newsrooms across the state, including for many underserved communities. And they give basically a free journalist to local newsrooms to help build up those local newsrooms, do community journalism. That program's been pretty successful. It's up for renewal right now. Big asterisk on the second part of this sentence. So there was a proposed deal struck with Google in California last year where the state would contribute $30 million into a fund to support journalism in California, and Google would contribute $15 million of funds in California. Earlier this week, Gavin Newsom announced that there was an $11 billion budget deficit in California. Everything's bigger in California, including the deficits. So decreasing the state's commitment from $30 million down to $10 million. So we're steaming mad about this. We want it to get a lot bigger. Even $45 million is not nearly enough to support news in California. Going the wrong direction, but still $10 million is a lot of money. So I'm going to pause and digress here for a second. Our bar is so low for what we can do to support journalism and community information in the public policy arena. So in that same budget, California Governor Gavin Newsom's announcing an $11 billion budget deficit, can only spend $10 million on journalism. What is the size of the film and TV production tax credit that he is proposing in that budget? Making movies and TVs. Does anybody want to guess? 1 million? A billion? $750 million to make film and TV. Okay, Pennsylvania. We'll leave out public notice. Bill and the PNA folks are going to talk, I think, about public notice nests. But $0 in the Pennsylvania budget right now for journalism? Are there any programs that I'm not aware of? How large is the Pennsylvania film and TV production tax credit? Does anyone know? A year. $100 million a year, including $10 million for the Apple Corporation, $5 million for Netflix. I'm just saying that if the taxpayers of Pennsylvania in this room are going to give $5 million to the Netflix Corporation, $10 million to the Apple Corporation, on top of, what's math, $85 million for everything else that's being shot and filmed in Pennsylvania, I think they probably have money in the budget to support community journalism and information as well. I will say one last thing about that. We try to figure out all the indicators when we go to lawmakers and say how important journalism is, why it's civically vital for our communities, how it's good for democracy. I will tell you something, as somebody from LA and watching the film industry win these battles, you go look at that Pennsylvania Film Commission report to the Assembly, what they say is not how beautifully shot all these Pennsylvania productions are. Look at how good Jeremy Renner looks in like Mayor of Kingstown, right? It's cool to see Pittsburgh on camera, but what they say is that every dollar of public investment creates almost $6 in economic activity in the state of Pennsylvania. Those sorts of stories resonate when you're talking about asking for money from state legislatures that are trying to feed millions of empty mouths. So, digression over. So, lawmakers across the US have been proposing all sorts of policies that are new and innovative and all share the same goal of trying to support the kind of work that you are doing here. So, basic principles. We care a lot about the First Amendment, and we are scared to death of the idea of politicians coming in and meddling with independent newsrooms and using public funding or public policy to try to coerce independent journalists to scare them off from writing the truth about their public officials. We're also scared to death of public officials and politicians using public subsidies to reward their allies for writing things that we like. So we try to design our policies based on content-neutral principles that are open and broad-based and put the onus on the industry, the public, to conform to basic principles that would make them eligible for subsidies. And the greatest tool for this, and the greatest tool to support editorial freedom while also supporting the industry, is the tax code. The tax code is already working for us. Who here is from a nonprofit newsroom, works with a nonprofit newsroom? All right, 501c3 status. That's a tax code, broad-based, applies to all sorts of philanthropy and nonprofit work in the United States, but it's been incredibly powerful for the journalism industry. As the commercial sector has collapsed, tax deductibility has enabled philanthropy and foundations to come in and grow your newsrooms and support the work that you're doing. And so that is a basic principle that we are taking and trying to narrow just a little bit more to say we can do more like that for the journalism industry. So, Pennsylvania's potential. What I like about this conference, and from what I understand, I'm not from Pennsylvania. I'm a fill-in speaker. I'm not Steve Waldman, and so I don't know a lot of you, and I'm still learning a lot about the state. But what I've been told is that this is the first conference that is bringing together a diverse bunch of voices from across the state together in the same room for the first time who have shared common interests about how to support journalism and community news, community information in Pennsylvania. The people who have the power to do something are in this room. So what we like to do and what we push, our agenda, if you will, is that we want to bring a really big tent to the table and try to broaden the pushes for these kinds of media policies and subsidies. What we see is a sector of trusted news leaders who have been serving Pennsylvania for many decades, more than a century. We see incredibly brilliant innovators who are trying things for the first time, some of them succeeding. We see great nonprofit and foundation leaders who are doing what they can to support community news and information in the state. I see a strong labor movement and unionized journalists who are tired of losing their jobs. All of these packaged together are the kind of thing that can get you votes. And again, to go Moneyball, to get subsidies, you need legislation. To get legislation, you need votes. To get votes, you need a broad-based coalition that is going to get lawmakers from no to yes. So, America's premier swing state, like one of the things that I'm like selfishly excited about Pennsylvania is that you have a divided government. This is the quintessential place where red and blue America meets. You can pass right now more policies in blue Democratic controlled states in the US, but we have Republican lawmakers who are interested in supporting community news too. You have a lot of lawmakers who represent rural districts that have been hit hardest by community newspapers shutting down. In their district, they know fewer people are calling them. Fewer people know who they are. When they go up for election, they don't know their names. So this is an issue that Republicans care about too. And a policy that wins in Pennsylvania, I believe, is a policy that could win in all 50 states. So intellectually, I'm really interested. So what wins? This is our sort of theory of the case, and this is all future-looking rather than necessarily describing what's in session right now, which the PNA folks will talk to you about. So one of the things that we really like is a concept that is the small business advertising tax credit. What is this? It's an indirect way of supporting the news industry by supporting community businesses to advertise in local newsrooms. The concept being that it costs money for those businesses to advertise. This is part of their client acquisition costs. What's going on with these small businesses right now? They get a lot of their products from China or Vietnam or other places abroad that are about to face tariffs. Their costs are going to go up. Next year, you're probably going to have a lot of small business owners in Pennsylvania who are going to be looking for relief. They want to stay open. They're mom and pops. They're on Main Street. Their lawmakers know who they are. Small business advertising tax credit allows those businesses to deduct a portion of their advertising, qualified advertising and community media, against their tax bills. So this is an indirect way to direct public subsidies into newsrooms by supporting small businesses first. And in so doing, you're building stronger relationships between your newsrooms and the small businesses that you're trying to cover, support, get them to support you. And, you know, this subsidy goes away, you still have a relationship left, you still have a business relationship left, and hopefully they're still advertising with you. So this is a policy that's gotten a lot of attraction from Republican lawmakers that we work with. We were actually working on a really promising bill in Kansas with Republican sponsors. It's gotten shelved for now, but we're going to be back at it. We've got another red state that we're developing with a similar policy. So this is something that has pretty broad-based appeal politically. Other policies that we really like that could be really promising. The journalist employment tax credit, another really popular one. Again, goes straight to the heart of the problem. If you want more journalists, if you want more journalism, get more journalists. These attract broad-based coalitions inside of the industry. So these, again, successful in New York and Illinois. Versions of it have been proposed in many other states this year, but they haven't gotten so far yet. Government advertising set-asides. This one's really wonky, but it's really important because this is the one that's really blown up this year. Think about whatever township, state government, agency you can think of. They have advertising and communications budgets that they use to tell the public about their public services. These are dollars that have already been appropriated. These are taxpayer dollars that these agencies are already spending to reach the public. Policies that we've been working on, they've been introduced in places like New York City, similar ones in San Francisco, state of California. We've got a bill that's pending in Connecticut right now, Minnesota. Some of these policies say, all right, these government agencies, if they're going to be spending taxpayer dollars on outreach, should be setting aside 50% of those budgets for advertising in community and ethnic media to reach those hard-to-reach communities, to let them know about public services through their trusted community partners. So this is not really an entitlement. It's still a competitive bidding process. You have to set up as a vendor to get it, but basic principle being that, like, if you go to your lawmaker, they don't have to spend any extra money to direct more public support to community media. They can take the money that they're already spending and direct it a little bit more smartly. And it's a win-win-win when designed well, because it allows public agencies to reach communities that are a little bit harder and less familiar with their services. allows the public to know a little bit more about what their public agencies are offering and doing, and supporting community media at the same time. Journalist fellowship programs also been popular in many states. Usually this involves the legislature giving some extra money to a local university system to send fellows to local newsrooms. I like New Mexico's version of this program. New Mexico, very small state, they're worried about brain drain. So they're training very talented, capable journalism students at the universities, but then they graduate and there's no jobs in New Mexico media, and they end up leaving the state. They come to California. Fellowship program in New Mexico says we'll take those graduates from public universities in New Mexico, we'll place them in a New Mexico newsroom for a year after graduation. The idea being that you ease their way into the industry, you're providing direct support to those newsrooms right now, and ideally, on the other side of the program, a new job has been created for a homegrown local journalist who knows your community better than anyone. So, making it happen. This is the hard part. So, we're a little fish in a big pond. We are not as skilled at Hollywood at winning all these film and tax credit production fights. A lot of us are 501c3s that have limits on the amount of political activity we can engage in. We don't make endorsements of candidates like newspapers do. Newspapers have historically dominated this realm and have been very effective. There's now a much broader ecosystem that has less political capability than the industry that is supplanting. So we're lacking some capacity on the advocacy side for the breadth of the industry. So it takes time, people talking to each other, meeting. But you can build a broad and diverse coalition of really interested people across the state, which is really great because that means you have a lot of different lawmakers you can call and say, hey, it would be great if you voted yes on this bill. So again, everybody from newspaper publishers, commercial broadcasters, public media, the university system, community foundations that are already donating to support journalism. I think the Press Forward Local in Washington State was helping a big push up there for a small platform tax to fund journalist employment grants. The labor movement, society professional journalists, there are all these groups that care about what happens to journalism. You can draw them in. Does take some coalition building, might take a little bit of philanthropy to help build capacity, but that's how you do it. Those are long-run fights, and they start right here in a room like this with people who are interested in those kinds of policies and interested in working together. It's not going to happen because a group like Rebuild Local News says, hey, we're really smart, we're experts, we think this is a great idea, we're for this, we're against this. Your state lawmaker doesn't care. They haven't heard of us, we're not local to them, they don't work with us. They work with you. They depend on your news. Their voters depend on your news. They depend on your community activity to have interesting places to live in. They care about you. So it's you who's going to be carrying these policies across the finish line. So raise your hands. Who's interested in doing something like this in Pennsylvania? Look around this room at the people who are raising, keep your hands up. Look around this room at the people who have raised their hands. This is the constituency to win. So, I'm just saying, I see a room full of interested people. I see a world of possibility. I think it'll take a lot of work. There's some conflict involved, as with all coalition building. It's a little bit hard. It requires some new alliances and making some new friends and stretching a little bit. But I think there's a world of possibility here, and I hope that you're as excited as I am for what can be possible here and also everywhere else, because if you get a victory here, that instantly becomes a model for other states to do it too. We've seen it in California, we've seen it in New York, seen it everywhere else. So, I'd love to get the questions. This is my email address if you want to reach me. I see Tristan Loper around here. He loves talking about this stuff too, so he's in the back. Wave your hand, Tristan. I love talking about this stuff. We'll talk about it with anyone, but I do want to emphasize, again, this stuff doesn't happen by me, somebody like me coming in saying, let's do this. It happens because you're excited about it. So, who has questions about this? I'm sure no one has thoughts or feelings about politics.
Curious about the employment tax credits. Some of the most interesting work is being done by nonprofit startups, which by definition don't pay those state income taxes. How have you seen that play out in places? It strikes me that the employment tax credit really benefits the legacy organizations. Is there some moral hazard there of you're, in effect, subsidizing Alden's cuts by allowing them to cut a reporter and then replace it with the help of a tax credit versus somehow steering public policy funds to a more vibrant startup world?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the question is, don't tax credits favor commercial places that pay taxes, including people we don't like so much, as opposed to nonprofit organizations that may not pay corporate income taxes? So in the weeds, this is actually something that it's our responsibility to try to deal with, because I mentioned that great New York State program, the really big one that launched through the door. One of the major flaws in it is that it did not include in the statutory text that it included nonprofit newsrooms, because there are ways to design these policies to include nonprofit newsrooms. New Mexico's tax credit bill that it introduced this year spelled it out. Illinois is doing it. New York, it was left out. So we're having to do some cleanup work right now in New York State. We're working with the public broadcasters to make sure that nonprofit newsrooms are included in these tax credits. I mean, it's very complicated. So the way that it kind of works is that you make the tax credits refundable, meaning that if you have a tax liability that's larger than the tax that you pay, then effectively that money gets paid back to you by the tax agency as a grant. So for a nonprofit newsroom, like in New Mexico, it was a little bit wonky the way that they set it up. You'd have to register as a C corporation so that you could file a tax return that basically said you owed $0 in taxes, and then you could receive the $15,000 per journalist that the tax credit was setting up. So basically that is like a wonky challenge of using the tax code that is not insurmountable, but it is a pitfall that people will fall into if they are not careful. Illinois' version of the tax credit, you mentioned the corporate chains, and we're talking about public dollars. So Illinois included language in their employment tax credit statute that said that newsrooms owned by privately managed funds, we're talking about hedge funds, private equity, and I think also publicly traded corporations would be excluded from eligibility. So the kind of places that are pumping cash out of the industry instead of reinvesting, there are ways to tailor these policies to exclude them from support. I will say on a political level, sounds great to only create a policy that supports nonprofit newsrooms. What is PNA going to say about it when it comes time to call lawmakers for votes? And not to put PNA on the spot, but point being that like you are in an ecosystem with other people and you are the weakest part of it politically. And so when you make demands to exclude other players, it's a recipe for losing, and we've seen nonprofits get beaten like a drum when that happens. Like, I'm sorry, like it's a loser politically. So there are ways to sort of massage and deal with the predator problem. But people expect public policy to be fair, and in the political arena, like the kind of people in this room who are advocating for it don't have the kind of juice to like outcompete other interests. If you're going to come in arguing that other people shouldn't get money, you get beat all the time. Yes, ma'am.
We are concerned, given the way things are happening in this country, that fairness is not really what you will be talking about to these lawmakers, but perceptions of liking the media by spending money in that direction. I mean, it's going in the opposite direction unless we're going to pretend not to see what we see.
Yeah. Question is, are we concerned that public sentiment about journalism is going in the wrong direction? Legislative sentiment not wanting to support journalism is the question. So this is true. And I think, to be honest, it's something that you see a bit more from the Republican Party right now. It's not universal. And this is the thing where community media, local relationships are actually really important. I mean, I think almost every bill that I've worked on has had bipartisan support. I'll be honest, in a lot of those blue states, there's less Republican support, but there is Republican support in most of the policies that I work on. And we very proactively seek out Republican lawmakers who are interested in community media. And I think, to be honest, we're interested in telling that story. And I'll level with you, like, I come out of the labor movement, which is very closely associated with one political party. And let me tell you, if your institution is heavily reliant on having the favor of one political party, that is a not a great recipe for, your continued vibrancy and relevance in the political arena. It means you'll constantly be playing defense when you need to be playing offense. So we have to figure out how to tell that story if we're dealing with lawmakers who don't already understand it. A lot of times people don't understand how much trouble we're in. They think we're doing fine. So that's part of the challenge and part of our responsibility, to become better storytellers about what's wrong with what we're doing. Yes, sir.
This may seem like a simple question, but how do you define a newsroom in 2025, and who would actually be eligible to receive this type of money?
So, great question is, how do you legislatively define a newsroom and decide who's eligible? So, this is not quite like the press freedom world, where I think a lot of us have more experience, and where a lot of times I think, and at least in my experience in California in the press freedom world, we're arguing for pretty universalist interpretations of the First Amendment. Like, yes, we're arguing for press access, but also we're arguing for the public as well. When police are unlawfully arresting protesters at a First Amendment protected gathering, they're also protecting, or they're arresting journalists too. This is actually how I got into the public arena, was like journalists, my coworkers, getting arrested by LAPD covering a protest. Fundamentally though, in the economic arena, you do have to set boundaries somewhere. You have to protect against pink slime, fraud, and I'll be honest that those boundaries are incredibly fuzzy, and it's where I think a lot of the heartburn from this space comes from, because I have a Substack. I don't run it as a business, but I do have a lot of people who would pledge subscriptions. Like, what's the threshold where I, as an amateur blogger, newsletterer, should become eligible for public subsidies to do what I'm doing? Because, the whole story of the last 20 years is that the threshold for entry for publication, publishing, sharing, content creation has gotten so low that news is like the slowest thing on the internet. So you have to set a boundary somewhere, and we do, again, going back to the First Amendment, we can't pick and choose like who we think the good journalists are. You have to set objective criteria. And so this is spelled out in a lot of the different bills that we work on, from the just different journalist employment tax credit bills. There are usually two components. First is defining a newsroom, and there's usually some pretty general language about covering community news and events, and might have an audience in the region. There are actually a lot of fine ways to draw that pie. Sometimes there'll be a language saying, serving a purpose akin to, the historical function of newspapers. You can kind of fudge a little bit that way. For broadcasters, it's a lot easier. They have FCC registrations. Nonprofits, you can say that they're a nonprofit. Some of the language for nonprofits says have a stated mission of covering journalism in their statements with the IRS. Some risk area in here, by the way, because the tax credit bill that I was working on in New Mexico this year had in its inclusion of nonprofit newsrooms a requirement that, to be a nonprofit newsroom, to be de facto eligible, you had to say in your IRS statement that your mission was to cover local news in New Mexico. Well, there are a couple of investigative nonprofit newsrooms in New Mexico that are really small, that technically, if you look at the letter of their IRS filings, they don't actually say in their mission with the IRS that they're covering, journalism in New Mexico. It's a little bit more vague than that. So a lot of this stuff, you do kind of have to listen to local stakeholders and see who's going to get cut out, who's going to get included in specific definitions. And this can get very contentious because, maybe people don't like one local outlet and they want to find ways to cut them out. You start getting into some weird internal politics. Again, it's public policy. It's very risky to go down that road. So I would just say that a lot of my job is to work on those sorts of definitions, to try to include what's reasonable to support, and what's reasonable is always going to be subjective, and it's honestly probably going to change with time. So this is all a laboratory, and we're also going to find out what's wrong with it once more of these policies get created, kind of like the New York situation. And then the other piece of these policies is that they include definitions of journalists, and because these are employment subsidies, it's a little bit easier to create definitions of journalists as workers and employees who are performing activities, rather than creating definitions of journalists who are oh, and they're registered with the local law enforcement and have a press pass with them, and they're sort of certified as an official journalist. We never do that. So we define journalism as an activity, as a function that is performed, rather than a kind of like status that you hold or a sort of registration that you hold, because again, we think about the First Amendment. So there are ways of doing this that mostly get there, but I think the answer to the question is that like there will be mess on the margins always in every single one of these policies. How many? 1 minute? Okay, one more question? Yes?
Yeah, I'm curious if you could speak a little bit about states that don't have robust legislative policies, supporting newsrooms. What are those first step policies you think are realistic goals to actively fight for?
I think this is something that it might be interesting to ask Senator Stottleman about this when he comes up, because the way that Illinois did it is that they started with a coalition, a commission to kind of study the problem and then come up with ideas for how to get into it. And that kind of had the twofold effect of bringing people together and creating a kind of civic infrastructure for them to like look at the issue and then get comfortable with each other and then push for public policies. Some states, honestly, you get like a inspired lawmaker who just introduces a bill and hops right in, and then suddenly you're having to build a coalition on the fly. I will say that I've actually done a lot of that work this year. Lawmakers are just like looking at what other states are doing and copying and pasting those bills out of nowhere, and we're like sprinting to catch up and like get to know them. It's like they're all looking at each other and they want to do something, so they're just like, oh, I'll just look at what Illinois did. So policies in Illinois are now spreading all over the place. So I think obviously I think you should start with a coalition. Sometimes the lawmakers themselves will get in front of you and you're having to like build a coalition after them, which is a little bit less, desirable, but it happens. The other thing is that, so for the government advertising piece in particular, so we found that when we go to some state governments and say, hey, let's do a 50% advertising set aside, it's a way to direct money to newsrooms right now, and it doesn't cost you anything. Some of the state agencies are like, well, hold up, like, we're not sure about this, we want to like study it a little bit more. And so we've started looking at policies that are a little bit more intermediate, and they're just transparency problems, or transparency policies. They say, let's actually just get an accounting of where the government is currently spending its advertising dollars. How much of it is going to national cable TV? How much of it is going to Google and Meta? Like, how many of these dollars are like going out of the state rather than circulating locally? You get the data, you get the transparency, you can use that to build a message and an empirical argument for why these policies are good. Because actually one of the things that we're lacking, we've got a lot of great studies of the decline of local news, but we are still lacking some empirical support for what kind of policies would be most effective for different frameworks that we use. And so we cite those arguments all the time when we go up for testimony, but we're always hungry. So for the academics in the room, we're always hungry for more information that can tell us like how we can more finely cut some of these issues. Because to be honest, I will say that a lot of the policy work that we do is downstream from culture rather than downstream from the evidence. And so we try to accommodate that, but we need to get smarter, I think. All right. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Matt. I already found you on Substack, and I'm now subscribed. Looking forward to dig in. All right, that was great. All right, next up, we have an insightful session led by Bill Cotter, who is president and CEO of the Pennsylvania News Media Association. Bill and other members of PNA will explain some of the organization's lobbying efforts with the Pennsylvania legislature, as well as the export resources and industry-wide training available to PNA members. Under Bill's leadership, PNA launched its 100th anniversary by establishing 3 new focus areas: journalism, sustainability through philanthropy, media literacy in the classroom, and increasing diversity in newsrooms.
All right, good morning. So while my team is coming up, I thought I would just walk a little bit because I usually talk with my hands, so if I have a mic in one hand and my notes in another hand, I won't be talking. Oh yeah, I won't be in Tanya's way. So hey, good morning to everybody. Happy Friday morning. It's been a terrific couple days, and thank you to the Summit Planning Committee. We are absolutely thrilled to be here. Our team this morning is going to talk about our legislative initiatives that are happening and our legal initiatives that are happening here in Pennsylvania. We are really excited about this industry. We've heard a lot over the last couple days about our challenges, right? I mean, I think everybody knows the challenges. When I looked at Zach's slides yesterday when he was talking about Pennsylvania, what I looked at was we only have one county that doesn't have a local news source. We are the fifth state, is that correct? I think the fifth state with a number of media members across the country. So sometimes the glass half full is really, really important for our industry. We recognize the challenges. There is a lot of great work being done across the Commonwealth. I've had the opportunity over the last 2 years to visit over 100 of our members, from the Philadelphia Inquirer to the Post-Gazette to Penn Live to small weeklies, digital only. We have lots of vibrant members that are doing great work. The support that we have here in Harrisburg, our legal and legislative team, is like no other. You're going to meet some folks this morning, and I've had the opportunity to work with a lot of them for a lot of years. They are passionate, they are intelligent, they are tenacious about the support of the news media industry in Pennsylvania. So let's meet them. So our panelists this morning. Barb Huskin is the consultant of legislative affairs for PNA. At the Pennsylvania State Capitol, she advocates for legislation that champions the news media industry, the First Amendment, robust local journalism, and transparent and accessible government. She graduated from Elmhurst University in Illinois with a BA degree in political science and attended American University in Washington, D.C. Prior to joining PNA, she was a journalist at LNP, Lancaster Online, where she held several reporting and editing positions before becoming executive editor. So Barb, wave to the group so we know who. Okay. Next is Jan, all the way at the end. Jan Murphy is the Director of Government Affairs for the Pennsylvania News Media Association, where she serves as an advocate for the news media industry at the Pennsylvania Capitol. In that role, she fights for the First Amendment, government transparency, accountability, and accessibility in robust local journalism. A Mechanicsburg native, Jan is a graduate of Ball State University, where she earned a journalism degree. Her 4 decades of working in the news media business began in Indiana at the Frankfurt Times. She then returned to Pennsylvania to work at the Sentinel in Carlisle, the Intelligencer in Doylestown, and the Patriot News Penn Live in Harrisburg. At Penn Live, she covered state government, working out of the Capitol newsroom for more than 2 decades. Melissa Maluski is a PNA media law counsel. She offers advice and training on legal issues, including open meetings and public record laws, news gathering and the First Amendment, defamation and invasion of privacy, advertising compliance, independent contractor issues, local government codes, and intellectual property. Melissa advises journalists on open records requests and appeals at all stages of the process and conducts pre-publication review of news, editorial, and advertising content. She reviews proposed legislation and drafts responsive and mandatory language, offers expert testimony during legislative proceedings, and provides the media perspective to lawmakers during all phases of the legislative process. Melissa also represents the print and digital media industries during the administrative regulatory process in response to proposed court roles, and advocates on behalf of the media industry as amicus curiae in the Pennsylvania appellate courts. Melissa earned a BA degree in telecommunications from Penn State University and a JD degree from Weiner University School of Law. Melissa is admitted to practice before the Pennsylvania State Courts and the Middle District Court of Pennsylvania. Paula Knudsen-Burke, to my left, is the Reporters Committee Senior Supervising Attorney in Pennsylvania, leading the organization's legal work in the state as part of the local legal initiative. She joined the Reporters Committee in 2020 from LNP Media Group in Lancaster. A licensed Pennsylvania attorney for 2 decades, Paula has worked in both the legal and media fields. In 2017, she helped launch The Caucus, a watchdog publication covering state government and politics. She also led the investigatives and enterprise teams as the editor of LNP Media Group, the publisher of The Caucus. Before joining The Caucus, Paula was the Director of Government Affairs at the Pennsylvania News Media Association. Paula is a graduate of Dickinson School of Law of the Pennsylvania State University. She also received her undergraduate degrees from the Pennsylvania State University in both journalism and Spanish. Interesting. Paula is a member of the Pennsylvania Bar Association's Bar Press Committee and the Pennsylvania Freedom of Information Coalition. How about a big round of applause for our panelists this morning? Okay, so just briefly, this is who we are, P&A. You heard Tanya? Oh, I'm sorry. This is who we are. P&A is the official trade association in the state of Pennsylvania. We do belong to a group called NAM, which is a nationwide association of all the press associations. There are 47 press associations. So we certainly are getting intel from our colleagues in other states that are passing laws, as we heard Matt talk about tax credits, public notices. It's not just what's happening here in Pennsylvania. We're very, very connected to the News Media Alliance, the Local Media Association, National Newspaper Association, and our NAM colleagues. Also, Paula, through the local legal initiative, the Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press employs attorneys in Pennsylvania to help local media defend against legal threats and lawsuits, assist with public records and court access, and provide pre-publication review and other legal services. So what we're going to do, I'm going to sit down and we're going to have Jan and Barb talk about our legislative initiatives for 2025. Melissa will talk about our legal initiatives, and Paula will talk about the legal initiatives for the Reporters Committee. So I'll turn it over to Jan.
Thank you, and welcome to Harrisburg. And as someone who spent 2 decades, who spent more than 2 decades working on the state capitol, I hope while you're here, if you haven't visited our state capitol, that you take the time to walk up to see it, because it is a beautiful place, and it was my home away from home. Barb and I spend a lot of our time walking the halls of the Capitol and promoting issues of interest to the news media across Pennsylvania, and promoting our transparency laws and working to protect and strengthen them. And this session, this legislative session, our #1 priority is public notice modernization. Pennsylvania's 1976 Newspaper Advertising Act requires public notices to appear in printed newspapers. And clearly, our industry is evolving increasingly to digital platforms. So we're working, this has been an issue that I just joined PNA in November, but Barb knows that this has been an issue on legislators' plates for a number of years, and they've been coming up with all kinds of ideas of how to deal with it. But we are promoting the idea of keeping public notices in news sites and newspapers and online sites. And this session, Representative Robert Freeman, a Democrat from Northampton County, has offered legislation, it's House Bill 1291, that would modernize the public notice law, and there's some interest in the Senate as well to do that. So there is strong interest in addressing this issue finally, and we are working and listening to various groups to get ideas to suggest to them to continue or to put into the legislation. So it is definitely a product that is still in development, but there's clearly a desire to get this legislation through the legislature this session. So we have other things on our plate as well, and I'll let Barb take on some of the transparency work that we're doing.
Yeah, and we'll get to some of the issues relating to journalism sustainability and also big tech as it relates to Pennsylvania. Unfortunately, we don't have the luxury of working on one thing at a time, so we're constantly juggling a million different issues which relate to our transparency laws and legislation in Pennsylvania, as well as journalism sustainability and the importance of local journalism across the state. And I would just share this with you so that you know where I'm coming from. The only thing I'm probably more passionate about than local journalism in Pennsylvania is my marriage. So that gives you some sense, and I love my husband dearly, but I know how important, particularly in these times, what we do is just essential for our state and our nation and our communities. We did want to just mention the Sunshine Act, because that's very, very important, having public access to public meetings, and that's sometimes an issue, not just in Pennsylvania, but in other states too. So we are constantly working on initiatives on that front so that our journalists, when they go out, aren't barred from meetings, they aren't having trouble getting in or having access to what our elected officials are doing. We did have a huge a bill passed a few years ago, which requires that agendas for public meetings, that they must be posted, publicized at least 24 hours before the meeting. So this was a huge step. We're very excited about that. That has gone a long way, but perhaps not far enough, because what we find out is when we do these things, now we have some situations, some of which are actually currently pending in the courts, where some local municipalities, school districts, are not posting items, and then they bring it up as an emergency, things that should really not be. Part of the legislation is if you have an emergency that comes up, and I think we all have a sense of what an emergency might be, that would not have to be on that agenda. However, when you're bargaining or making decisions about teacher contracts, that's probably something that should be, you get advance notice on, and that citizens would know that that's something that they should have access to the deliberations. In at least one area that did not happen, and so there's a case pending there, and we are very hopeful that it will find for the plaintiff in that particular case, who now happens to be a state senator. I would also say, and these are the kinds of things we pay attention to too. As you know, COVID changed a lot of things for all of us, the way we live, the way we work, the way we do a lot. And that was also the case with the way we run public meetings. And so when we were going through COVID, there were special situations allowed, with remote access and that kind of thing, so that we could still have meetings, but it was just done a little bit differently. There are attempts now to make it so that more and more could be done remotely, not necessarily in the case of an emergency or a crisis or a pandemic. Just, and this I'll trailblaze a little bit, it might be a little more convenient for elected officials, but we don't like that idea. We're all for anything that provides remote access and creates a bigger audience for public meetings. Nobody, I don't think in their right mind, would be against that. What we are opposed to, and what we are fighting very, very hard on, is that we feel that nothing should replace the in-person public meeting. That there's something that happens kind of organically when you get constituents together in a room with their elected officials, when reporters are trying to get access to elected officials and that sort of thing. We don't like the idea of quorums allowed for some people that might be in Florida or tuning in. So there's a lot of legislation we're following right now to make sure that doesn't happen, and that we kind of approach this with what's best for the public and for the press who reports on all of these different meetings.
And along with our work on a transparency front, we constantly we have a legislative counsel as well on our team, Katie Gavinonis, who combs through every bill and looks for language that would chip away at what records the right to know law provides access to. And it really is a full-time job, if not more. And one of the things, though, that it kind of runs, counterintuitive to what you think we'd be promoting, but with our, right now, coroner records provide great access to information that might not be contained in police reports. And we are fighting to keep the coroner's work under the county code as opposed to subjecting it to the right to know law, because if it was under the right to know law, all you might be able to get is the name of the deceased, the date they passed away, the manner and cause of death. But there's information in the coroner's reports. I can just think of some examples are with prison deaths, that there was indications that force was a contributing factor to an inmate's death. And when things like that get revealed, it could cause change in policy or practice, and or should. And there's a number of toxicology results that are in coroner's work that can be very informative and can, require a change in policy or practice by an agency. And Barb mentioned COVID and some of the changes that happened during COVID. Well, one of the, I know it got a lot of attention in the media, but just to remind you of it, with the COVID cases that occurred in nursing homes, there was a lot of interest in how many deaths, how many cases are in nursing homes, so that families could make decisions about, where their loved ones were being housed and cared for. And the Wolf administration cited this 1955 law, the Disease Prevention and Control Act, that they said prevented them from being able to release that information. There was some workarounds that were done to be able to get some of that information out, but that is something that we would like to be subject to the right to know law. And there's just so many areas with this. And Melissa gets a lot of calls about right to know issues that she'll talk about. But just one last one that I want to mention is vexatious requesters. Vexatious being a word that a lot of us didn't know existed until we started working with on this issue. And these are folks that, and to a person, legislators that we speak with, there always is someone that they know of in their district who has made themselves a burden to their municipality by making voluminous or lots of requests for records. And in small communities that have small staffs, they're overwhelmed by some of these requests. And so legislators they want to try to crack down on access to records in some way, shape, or form. And we certainly are, opposed to those efforts and working with them on trying to find a way to resolve that concern. I think I'll pass it back to Barb, okay, to keep things moving.
I think we'd be remiss if we don't talk just a little bit about journalism sustainability, because we just had our colleague up here talking about that. I'm going to talk in a little bit of generalities. I think one of the things that it's important for you to know is that our team is constantly in conversation. We're looking at coalitions with national press groups, other press associations across the country, individual news organizations, that kind of thing. And it is ongoing, and it's huge. It's a huge amount of work, as it should be. So one of the things we've been looking at is some kind of sustainability legislation in the hope of something like that in Pennsylvania. And it would, as we look at it, it would be something that would include the small business tax credits that were mentioned earlier, the journalism employment tax credits, those kinds of things. And we're already through the foundation are doing work on a journalist fellowship. So that's an important thing too. We have worked with others on this legislation. The practicality of it was for this year, it's probably not going to go anywhere, but that doesn't mean we drop it. We're still working on that. We're still reaching out to other groups, that kind of thing. Every state is different. Obviously their laws are different. Their politics are different. The way they do certain things in the states are very, very different. There are some principles that should kind of stay the same across the country, but don't always necessarily. We do have a split government, obviously, with a Republican Senate and a Democratic by a hair House, and of course a Democratic governor. It is true that any legislation that we would get out would need to be bipartisan on any count, whether it's journalism, sustainability, or something to do with the right to know law. That's going to have to happen. I will say, in the landscape that we are in now, the reality is that is sometimes it's a big ask, but that doesn't mean we don't work at it and that we're not persistent with that. So, and I will say, in some states, many of the states that they talked about in Rebuild Local News are blue states. I mean, California, Connecticut, Minnesota, Illinois. It does make, depending on where you are and which side of the issue, or if we can come together, there are times that does make it just a little bit easier. But we deal with what we have, and we're up to that task. So just so that you know that we're constantly on that.
Yep, we're not operating in a vacuum for sure. And, as Matt had talked about before, this issue of having big tech compensate news publications for use of putting their journalism on their sites, that is something too that we're monitoring. We're seeing, what's happening what happened in Canada, what's happening in other states, and that it's not getting our, full attention right now, but we are watching it and definitely keeping an eye on that. And there's one last thing we just wanted to, a big success that we had last session, and she's very giddy about it, and rightfully so.
I will promise I won't dance on the table.
Go ahead.
But, a lot of times getting legislation through that you're excited about, it takes time. And we managed last year with our legislators and with a huge coalition of organizations across the state to finally get a anti-SLAPP legislation passed and signed by the governor. This is so huge. More than 10 years working on this through different leadership, Republicans and Democrats. And when it went through, I think it was unanimous in both houses. So sometimes that happens, like you're waiting, when's this going to happen? And then all of a sudden we were up and going. So this is a huge victory for the First Amendment. For the ability to not get knocked down when you say things that people in power and others don't like, that they can hold you up in litigation forever, and then they drain your bank accounts and you just keep your mouth shut then. So basically, I'm dumbing it way down because I'm not an attorney. So we're very excited about this. It's now Act 72 in Pennsylvania, and my understanding is the first case was there was opinion came down that's going to give attorney fees to the defendants in a case where something that fit the criteria for anti-SLAPP went through. That was in Delaware County, I think. So, and on that happy note, I'll turn it over to you guys.
Hi, folks. So I'm Melissa Molesky. I'm in-house counsel with the Pennsylvania News Media Association, and I've been in that role for almost 20 years. I wear a lot of hats for PNA, but one of my primary duties is to staff its legal hotline. So we're a little bit unique in the country in that we offer legal advice and counseling to our members. So I answer about 2,000 calls a year from news organizations, from the largest in the state to the very smallest in the state. And I answer any question that has to do with the law and how it affects how they do their business, including obviously the transparency laws that we focus so much on legislatively, but also things like defamation, invasion of privacy, wiretapping, SLAPP suits, you name it. I will give you advice on it if you're a PNA member. What's interesting about the PNA Legal Hotline is that it's not just a service for our members. It allows us to keep our finger on the pulse of what's happening across the state. And that translates to public policy, both at the legislature, in the court system, and with the executive level offices. Because for those of you who are not familiar with Pennsylvania, we have quite literally several thousand local governments. We are a very fractured system of governance here in Pennsylvania, and everybody kind of does their own thing. Some better than others. Sometimes I feel like a little bit of a harbinger of doom, because people don't call me when things are going right. You know, they call me when things are not working, and it's my job to make sure that the legislature, the court system, and our executive branch know when things aren't working right, and we need to address them. So legislatively, obviously, we have legislative council, and they work very hard to do what they're doing. But sometimes proactively, we can say to a legislator, look, we're hearing about these issues across the state. Or we can say to the court system, we're hearing about these issues across the state. We need to address it with a policy. That happens all the time. That's a big part of what the PNA Legal Hotline does, not just for its own members, but for the public that we serve. You didn't hear Jen and Barb say this, but I'll say it for them. PNA is often the only voice at the legislature advocating for the public good, for transparency, for maintaining government accountability. That's why legislators look to this organization and have done so for many decades, because we are the voice of the people through the media that serves them. And we do that on every single day. It occupies all of their time. It occupies a significant part of my time. So we really feel it is our duty, not just to represent the industry, but the people they serve, both in the courts, with the executive branch, and most often with the legislature. I have a lot of other duties I do for PNA. I'm happy to expand on them, but I'll save time for questions. And I'll turn it to Paula.
Is it on? Okay. Okay. I'm Paula, and I have an office at the Pennsylvania News Media Association, but I am an employee of the Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press, which is based in Washington, D.C., and is a national nonprofit law firm that works on behalf of reporters. Has anybody ever called the Reporters Committee hotline? Okay, some folks. Please call. We have a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week hotline. If it's a Pennsylvania call, you may get routed to me. Probably if it's the middle of the night and it's an emergency, you'll get routed to me. I am the Pennsylvania-based attorney. Most of our lawyers are in Washington, D.C., but we do have a special program that was launched in 2020 that's called the Local Legal Initiative. So we have lawyers on the ground in Pennsylvania, Oklahoma, Tennessee, Colorado, and Indiana. And in fact, in Indiana today, my colleagues are litigating a public access to execution case. So we litigate all over the country. Here in Pennsylvania, and we have a number of different services that you can see. Our services are available to broadcast freelancers, student journalists, online, print, people who run their own Facebook news entity. So please feel free to call. You can also, I don't think it's on there, but media, MEDIA, at rcfp.org is a good way to get in touch with us. It'll go to our comms team. So if you have a request for training, we do free trainings on some of the topics Melissa talked about, but all over the country. So we can do trainings on mostly news gathering issues. So if you call and say, hey, I want to form an LLC, that's not really what we do. We're here to protect your rights to news gathering. And we have a separate division within the Reporters Committee that's called ProJourn. It does help with some of those business side issues. They're about 5 years old, so we're kind of a national one-stop shop for all kinds of issues that you might be facing. But I just wanted to share, can you go back one? I can't remember what was on that slide. Here in Pennsylvania, some of the things that it's really, we set this up very well, that it goes from the legislature to Melissa, who gets calls on the hotline, and then if she thinks that it's a significant case that should be litigated, and the newsroom probably doesn't have money because all of your budgets are limited, she'll kick it over to me, we'll do an intake process, and my services, the services of our entire team are free, which is pretty cool. So if you're familiar with civil legal aid, we are the civil legal aid organization for Newsroom. So in the 5 years that this program has been running in Pennsylvania, we've litigated cases all over the state, ranging from Erie, Crawford County, Blair County, Westmoreland, Allegheny, Butler, Cumberland, Center, Lackawanna, Philly, Bucks. I mean, that's just some I can think of, as well as statewide cases. And we've represented anyone from freelancers, podcasters, all the way up through Spotlight PA, The Inquirer, and very large organizations like NBC. So if you have an issue that you're wondering about and you're like, hey, is this a good case? Should I do something with this? And you're not sure, call. You can call Melissa, you can call me. We confer daily. And right now, some of the interesting cases we're working on involve, a lot of our cases involve law enforcement. If you cover law enforcement in Pennsylvania, you know how very difficult it is to access those records. We have a cold case autopsy for a person who was found dead more than 20 years ago. That case has been sealed. We're trying to gain access. Autopsies, just to underscore Melissa's or whoever said this, autopsies in Pennsylvania are public records. We have litigated this again and again and again in cases all across the Commonwealth. Coroners go to the legislature and they try to seal these records. They try to seal them through court actions. They're very important records, and they are public records. So one other issue I want to point out that is a difficult category of records to get, body camera footage. Has anybody tried to get body camera footage from body-worn camera from officers? How'd that go, Davis? It didn't. So, yeah, it won't. Back in 2017, there was a Pennsylvania Supreme Court case that said, yeah, you can use the right to know law to get access to cameras on police vehicles as well as the body-worn. Within weeks, the legislature quickly moved to take body camera footage and vehicle footage out of the scope of the right to know law, and they passed Act 22 of 2017. You can read about it on the Office of Open Records website. It's a terrible law. It's anti-transparency, and we see very few cases throughout the state because the law was written in a way that discourages transparency. So I am also the voice of doom and gloom on this topic. Yes, this is the doom and gloom side, but we are litigating that issue. We just filed a case last week in Lancaster City involving two teenagers who were involved in a use of force incident by police, and the police and the city of Lancaster have denied access to that body camera footage. Taxpayers pay for body camera equipment. The promise, I'm doing air quotes for those of you who have fallen asleep, of body cameras was that there would be greater transparency for both law enforcement and the public. Guess what? There is not greater transparency for the public. So we're going to keep fighting for it in the courts. If you have questions about it, call. And we know our colleagues over in their legislative advocacy will be pushing that as well. But this is really all kind of a team effort from the legislature over into the court systems. And if you, like I said, if you ever have questions, you think maybe you have a case, we're happy to take a look at it. And because our resources are limited, not every case is going to be one that we can accept. But happy to talk to you, do trainings. And if you go to the next slide, Bill, one thing I just want to make sure, even if you think I can't listen to this woman ramble for one more second, go to rcfp.org, and there's a section that's called Legal Resources. If you pull down, we have guides for every state in the country on open government and open courts, and you can also do a compare feature. So if you're covering a court issue out in Oklahoma, but you're here in Pennsylvania and you think, oh gosh, is it the same there as it is here? You can compare back and forth. So we've got tons of resources. We want to help. We want to talk to you. And if you have an issue in another state where we have personnel, please be in touch. But that's all I have to say. I'll take questions.
I just want to add that these women that I work with, and also Katie Gavinonis, who's not here, our legal counsel, they are brilliant. They are absolutely brilliant. And so it's fun sometimes because we don't always agree on issues or how we should proceed. And it can get a little interesting if we're on keyboards. It gets like this, and sometimes it's in person, but it's really a good back and forth, and we feel that we're hoping that we're serving the industry to its best and also the public. I just think that's really important to know. And I do want to mention, too, we work very hard at maintaining and building relationships with legislators on both sides of the aisle. This is not an either-or in Pennsylvania. It can't be. If somebody comes out really against a bill that we're supporting this time, we don't end the relationship there. We have a new bill tomorrow and the day after that. So I just wanted to mention that as well.
Okay. I think we're ready for some questions. So, Natalie?
I have a question to start things off. When you were talking about the body cams, and thank you for bringing that to everybody's attention, what was their reasoning for being able to pass this bill? How did they work that through, saying, no, this will be good for everyone, when it obviously isn't?
Well, I don't know that they ever really said that.
That's fair.
So, they didn't really say that. I think it was, so Pennsylvania's Act 22 is part of the Wiretap Act here in Pennsylvania. The Wiretap Act is what makes Pennsylvania a two-party consent state. If you want to record someone's voice here in Pennsylvania, you must have their permission to do it if you're in an environment where there's an expectation of not being recorded. So it's kind of like an expectation of privacy, but the legal standard is a little bit different. So, for example, on a public street, at a public meeting, you don't have wiretap issues because there's no expectation of privacy.
But if I call Melissa and say, hey, Melissa, it's Paula, and then I quickly record and I haven't asked her permission, you can't do that in Pennsylvania.
It is a misdemeanor and it can rise to the felony level. So there are some significant consequences to that. And that law was originally passed to prevent the government from listening in on citizens' phone calls. It has morphed into something very, very different, including Act 22 of 2017. So it was, I think, maybe a little bit couched in the terms, and I know there were some press releases from some organizations that said this is, a benefit for transparency, and there is transparency language in the bill, but if you don't actually read it and understand it, then you don't understand how the law actually will work. And during our lobbying process to oppose the bill, it wasn't just us either. I think the ACLU was anti-Act 17 as well. We tried to illustrate to legislators and others the need for litigation would be the effect. In Pennsylvania, it is a very difficult legislative position to come out in opposition to anything supported by law enforcement agencies and the law enforcement community. And that's just the reality of where things stand here in Pennsylvania.
And part of the frustrating thing was there had been numerous public hearings across the state. One was Latrobe, for those of you out there, I don't know. One of them was in that area of the state. One of them was in Pittsburgh. One of them was in Montgomery County, where people came and testified. Here's why we think we should have transparency. And the bill was headed in a good direction. Then that Pennsylvania Supreme Court decision came down, and the version of the law that passed was dramatically different than the one for which public input had been sought, and many people worked on the process, including, like I said, law professors, criminal justice advocates, civil rights advocates. So I think, what Barb and Jan do day in and day out is try to convince the legislature, who is hearing from many voices on different topics, that transparency and public access is important. And unfortunately, in Pennsylvania, because of our weak ethics laws and the vast amount of monies that flow into the legislators, sometimes other interests are way over the public and transparency.
And I think this is part of a concerning trend, something that we're seeing in legislation across the board. It might be specifically some kind of right-to-know legislation, or it might be a vexatious requester bill. but even tucked in other bills. And that's why it's important to have our legislative council going through things. There just seems to be a trend to really limit access across the board. And this is and it's kind of like death by a thousand cuts. So this is something that we're watching very closely and really actively lobbying against. But it's concerning.
Yeah, legislators routinely, it is very common for us to get a bill from our legislative council. She'll pass along and say, look, this is cutting this new agency or this new committee or this new government entity out of the right to know law. And when they do that, like Barb said, it will kill Pennsylvania's public records law, death by a thousand cuts, because once some more specific law applies, the right to know law falls away. And a big part of our job in the last several sessions has been to illustrate to legislators when they put that throwaway sentence in their bill, this information is not subject to the right to know law, what they're actually doing is saying the public is not entitled to any information about this bill or about this new agency or about this new legislative effort or about this new training program or this new grant program or whatever they're creating. And it both misunderstands the purpose of government transparency, but it also misunderstands Pennsylvania's right to know law, which is designed to be the one-stop shop to govern law, the law that governs public access. And it contains robust exemptions for almost everything that these legislators say, well, we have concerns about this or this or this. Those specific issues were debated numerous times in depth during the passage of Pennsylvania's right to know law. So every time the legislature goes back and says, well, we're just going to forget about the right to know law, it's throwing away all of the testimony, all of the work, all of the thought process that went into those robust exemptions. So if you don't know, Pennsylvania's law says a record is presumed public unless an exception applies. And there are 30 exceptions to the law. And those exceptions are sometimes very simple, and sometimes they are very complex. But they are all very well thought out. I don't like any of them, but we live with them because we understand that not everything can or should be public. There are good reasons why some things shouldn't be widespread. And that's the bargain that we made, that every Pennsylvanian made when the right to know law was passed. So when we see these bills come along with great intent and wonderful things for Pennsylvanians, but a sentence or two that says no right to know law access, we have to oppose. We have to oppose. And it's in hundreds of bills every year. And we have someone who looks for that in hundreds of bills every year. And that is quite literally a full-time job.
And sometimes we have success in getting the legislator to realize that, when we talk to them, we point out, this provision in your legislation is totally going to cut off any kind of public oversight or accountability for how public funds are spent. And they're like, oh, no, we don't want to do that. Well, then why did you include that language in the bill? And they say, well, we just do it just because. And it's like, there's a problem with that. And, the law could end up being interpreted to totally, cut off access to that information. So we do have some success.
Jump in. You just reminded me. I know there are folks here from Temple. Another example of the legislature kind of limiting access is state-related institutions. So Temple, Lincoln, Penn State, and Pitt have this special carve-out that says they're not fully subject to the right to know law. Similarly, the legislature has a separate definition of its own records, and the most narrow of all is the court system. Good luck getting records out of the court system.
Right?
So there are all these little niches that just further limit. So if you are a student reporter at Temple and you've sought records, likely it's been a frustrating process because
if you're a reporter anywhere and have sought access, it is likely a frustrating process. And I spend a large amount of my time helping reporters at all levels of their career navigate the system because it's not simple. It can be unnecessarily adversarial. It can be expensive. And if you have to litigate, and Paula can't take your case, litigation fees are in the tens of thousands of dollars, if not more, and it can take years for a case to run from start to finish. I think the ACLU had a case we were involved in 6 years to get a policy at the very end of it that was 6 years outdated.
It was one policy document about PSP, the Pennsylvania State Police, its use of monitoring of social media. Seems like it would be important for the public to know that. That was a 6-year battle. And by the time that case processed through the courts, ultimately resulting in a good decision, that policy was no longer in effect.
I also would add, besides the great work that we're all doing up here, we also have Novak Strategic Advisors, who is our lobbying firm. So we talk about Katie watching all these bills. We also have a firm here in Harrisburg, 4 folks on that firm that also are watching all of the bills that are right across the street from the Capitol, that assist us with legislators, have great relationships on both sides of the aisle. So certainly this organization, along with Paula's help, we have what we believe is the strongest legal and legislative team in the country with watching all of these bills. It is, we are tenacious about it. If you can see the passion that's up on this stage, it's unbelievable. But the good work that's happening on behalf of the news media members across in the news media industry in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, it is unmatched around the country. Any other questions for us?
I have another one. We saw everything that happened with ABC News, Trump suing, the news people, and Disney giving in and money being paid out. And I wasn't sure if that was in any way related to this new anti-SLAPP bill, or how do we as individual journalists, independent journalists, how do we as journalists that work in legacy newsrooms, or anyone really in between that's providing news, feel protected when clearly the way moving forward is to intimidate people into speaking truth to power? What can we do from a legal perspective, or what can be done? Because that was very jarring for the whole industry.
Yeah, so I think that's related a little bit to Pennsylvania. I mean, it's not directly related, but the concepts are the same. Right. So it's wonderful that we got the law passed. Well, we didn't do it ourselves. It's wonderful that the law was enacted when it was, because it protects the freedom of speech and the freedom for your news organizations to say things that public officials don't like, people with money don't like. Because before that was put into place, SLAPP stands for Strategic Lawsuit Against Public Participation. So it's basically, in layman's terms, it's suing someone because you don't like what they say. Right? So the anti-SLAPP law that now says, if you do that, if you rich person or if you government officials sue the Philadelphia Inquirer because you don't like what they say, instead of dragging them through, months, potentially years, and thousands of dollars worth of litigation, at the very start of that process, there's a motion that you can file, that the speaker can file, so that the court will take a look at everything early on, and in most cases, if it's a SLAPP case, will be thrown out. Because if it's protected speech, it shouldn't be forced to go through litigation, right? The purpose of a SLAPP suit is to shut you up through money, right? The purpose of the anti-SLAPP statute is to combat that, both as a deterrent by its mere existence and as an actual penalty for when people try to sue you for what you say. So that law was passed in 2024. There are 2 parts to it. It has a statutory component, and it also has a component for practitioners who are, attorneys litigating these cases. The statute is fully in effect, and it contain, there are mechanisms by which attorneys can use it. The part we're waiting for full implementation on is the part where the Supreme Court will have to promulgate a rule to tell all the litigators, here's how this process works. So there is a proposal with the Pennsylvania Supreme Court's Civil Rules Procedural Committee. It was submitted back, I think, in late November of 2024. That process is not governed by, it doesn't follow a strict process like the legislature does. So we don't know when the court will take it up. We don't know. We know certain things about it. At some point, they will make a proposed rule. It will go out for public comment. We will participate. Many other organizations will participate that represent litigators, and they will weigh in. And at the end of it, there will be a rule of civil procedure to tell the litigators, if you have an anti-SLAPP issue in the court, this is how you deal with it. And not just the litigators, it will tell the courts, the judges who are deciding these cases, here's what has to happen in these cases in order for a proper resolution under the statute.
And just 2 quick things to add on. Has anybody in the room gone through pre-publication review process where a lawyer will look through? Yeah, okay. So a lawyer looks through and says, this is troubling, we got to change this, what's your attribution here? So it's kind of like super editor that adds in a lawyer. Getting pre-pub review is really helpful, and you saw the slide where ProJourn provides those services. Your own newsroom might provide those services. So pre-publication review, if it's a story that maybe, has some concerns about a powerful person pushing back, that's a great tool. Also making sure that your newsroom has robust insurance protection, meaning robust. So that's something that is really important, because if you get sued, now in Pennsylvania, we are fortunate that we have this new law, this anti-SLAPP law, but you're still going to need a lawyer to file the special motion to try to get you out of the litigation. If you don't have insurance that's going to pay for that lawyer, then you're still out of pocket to pay. So there are some steps even before, good, keeping great records, public records, that you can show this is coming from the four corners of a court record or document. So there's a lot of steps that come before actual publication that can provide much more support in the event of a lawsuit. And then if there's one, then hopefully the anti-SLAPP protections kick in. So it's kind of a continuum of preparing, and that's why, every practitioner, academic in the room, should be availing themselves of as much training as they can on pre-publication review, public records, court records, all that stuff, to make sure that you have as much fortification for your publication as you can.
And if you need recommendations, sometimes it's hard to find someone who can provide a libel policy. That's not a usual policy. You can't just call your local Erie guy or, Allstate. I maintain a robust list of organizations that, brokers that provide that kind of thing. So if you need help finding someone, just let me know and we can help connect you with the right people.
Yeah, one of those policies that is pretty common is called errors and omissions, E&O. So it's a special additional layer of coverage.
Oh, yeah, one more question.
Students reach out for legal advice and direction.
So the question, I'm just going to repeat the question. How often do students reach out for legal advice and direction?
It depends. We have, I'm not sure how many student organizations we have. We have a pretty large number of them. I tend to get most calls from them at the beginning of the year and anytime there's budget-related issues, because what I hear about most is that, hey, our administration wants to take away our funding or wants to cut us out of the student fee fund, or usually related to money, sometimes related to oversight. Those are the top two issues. The
Daily Pennsylvanian.
Yep, the Daily Pennsylvanian, like, for example, we had outreach from student journalists. The second most common issue is regarding access. We want to get access to campus police records. We want to get access to the records of the board of trustees. I wish I could give you a number. I can't. But it's more often than it should happen, right? Because we don't want access problems at any level of journalism.
Yeah. And we do interface a lot with the Student Press Law Center. So they'll send us issues. In December, we had a case that we litigated in the Court of Common Pleas of Philadelphia on behalf of the Daily Pennsylvanian, University of Pennsylvania's student newspaper. Was doing a great job trying to follow the arrests and protests of pro-Palestinian students, and the court records were just missing. They were nowhere to be found, and so we actually had to go to court to force access. I just recently represented a former student journalist who was subpoenaed to testify in a federal court case, and we had to move to quash her subpoena. So it's, for student journalists in particular, if they've moved on and they're no longer at the university, that can pose a particular challenge. But the Student Press Law Center is a great resource. Melissa, and then our organization as well.
And sometimes the Student Press Law Center tells us things that we don't even know. Sometimes the area is so specialized, like there's a particular tax determination letter from the IRS that I was surprised to learn, but the Student Press Law Center was like, oh yeah, this happens all the time, you want to send them this letter. So we try to maintain a network of helpful organizations so that if we can't answer the question, we can get them to someone who can. But we hear commonly from students. Yes?
About the liability insurance products, are they available for individuals
negotiables as well, such as freelancers?
They
So are the liability products, that's okay, are they available for freelancers as well?
They can, and we've had, and I think Paula's represented people who have had them as part of their homeowner's insurance. You can add an E&O policy as part of your homeowner's insurance. So that there's a wide, I'm certainly not an insurance expert, but there is a wide variety of availability for liability protection. So yes. Sir. Errors and omissions. It's called errors and omissions. It's usually, sometimes it's its own policy, sometimes it's a rider that's added onto a pre-existing policy.
So there are a number of students here. Tell us a little bit about the new voices legislation, its status, what chances it will be revised, what is needed to revise it.
So for the students here, can you talk a little bit about the new voices legislation?
Yeah, you want to?
You start.
We have been talking, we've been working with the folks in Pennsylvania who are really backing that bill, and a lot of them are high school and now college students. And this legislation, I think it's been passed in, or similar legislation has been passed in like 17 states across the country. I think the most recent is West Virginia, where the students would really be kind of the last bastion for what goes into their newspaper, whether it's online or print. I don't know if any are print anymore, but whatever. And they would still have advisors involved in the process, but this all came about because concerns of school administrators, a principal, a superintendent, and I'm married to a retired superintendent, so I know a little bit about that. They will come in and say, we're not comfortable with this story. We need you to change it, or we need you to pull it, or we need you to do that. So this would take that element out. And we have been in conversations with the students, the Student Press Law Center, for probably a couple years now. We've actually had a meeting recently where we brought together the School Administrators Association and the people behind who are backing this bill in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, and the conversation was enlightening to the students, but I mean, the upshot is Sherry Smith from the Pennsylvania Association of School Administrators said that right now is not a good time. I mean, because right now, school districts are dealing with a lot from the federal government, the elimination of the Department of Education, mandates from the state, all the business dealing with charter schools. I mean, there's a lot that they said they have on their plate right now. Don't make this be one of them. Like, wait till the fall, because, with the budget, that's another, they're trying to get their funding. But, she raised some concerns that I think the students kind of took to heart. I mean, she was saying things like, if she's concerned about student safety, if the student editor says, no, we're not going to run that, and there's a student who's very aggressive and really wants to have them run a story, that student editor's safety could be put at risk. I mean, she was raising that concern.
And I think, and I think probably the bottom line here is we're not really getting strong support from legislators on either side of the aisle. We have met with them. The students have been very zealous in their support, and they've been going to legislators, Democrats and Republicans. They are very well received by legislators, and usually the response is something along the lines of, wow, this is really interesting. We really think it's great that you came here and that you're, this involved. But that's kind of where it ends. There's no voice for support or anything like this. And I think because of some other issues in the state, it's been hard to make this a priority for anyone except for the students who are pushing this. So we continue to be in conversations with them, but I do think the bigger picture is just that there's not really an appetite for pushing this through right now in the legislature. And that doesn't mean it gets dropped. It just means, that's where we are right now. Hopefully it doesn't take as long as 10 years for anti-SLAPP.
Right.
So.
All right, well, thank you
So much. This was an incredible panel. We appreciate all of you. We're going to take a quick break. We're going to come back here at 11 for our next keynote with Senator Sodelman. That's going to be great. And also, if you haven't checked out of the hotel yet, hotel checkout is 11 a.m. They will store your luggage, of course, so make sure if you still need to do that, that you do that. And we'll see you back here very shortly.